The engine of Elvis Presley's white Cadillac rumbled to life, its deep growl echoing across the peaceful grounds of Graceland. Morning sunlight spilled over the mansion's white columns, painting long golden shadows across the driveway. The gates slowly began to open as dozens of fans pressed against the iron fence, waving photographs, homemade signs, and vinyl records, hoping to catch one final glimpse of the man they believed could do no wrong. Inside the car, Elvis rested one hand on the steering wheel. His schedule was full. Another charity event, another hospital visit, another crowd waiting for him somewhere beyond Memphis. Everything was perfectly planned. Then, a voice shattered the morning. "Elvis!" It wasn't the excited scream of a fan. It wasn't someone calling for an autograph. It was the desperate cry of someone watching an entire lifetime slip away. "Please, don't leave! If you drive through those gates today, I'll spend the rest of my life wishing I had found the courage to tell you the truth." The words ripped through the air like thunder. Elvis's foot slammed onto the brake. The Cadillac screeched violently across the stone driveway before stopping only a few feet from the open gates. Silence exploded. The birds nesting in the massive oak trees burst into the sky. The security guards froze. The fans stopped shouting. Even the engine seemed impossibly loud inside the crushing silence that followed. No one moved. For several endless seconds, the only sound anyone could hear was the slow ticking of the Cadillac's turn signal. Tick, tick, tick. Elvis looked into the rearview mirror. A woman stood beyond the security line. She wasn't holding a camera. She wasn't carrying an album. She didn't wear makeup or expensive clothes. A faded floral dress hung loosely over her thin frame, its fabric worn by countless years of use. Her shoes were covered with dust from miles of walking. Silver strands of hair escaped the scarf wrapped around her head as tears streamed uncontrollably down her face. She looked exhausted, not from age, from carrying something far too heavy inside her heart. The guards immediately surrounded her. "Ma'am, step back. You can't approach Mr. Presley." She didn't fight them. She didn't even try. Instead, she looked past every guard, past every fan, past every camera, straight into Elvis's eyes. The fear inside her gaze wasn't the fear of rejection. It was the fear of running out of time. She quietly whispered, "I only need 5 minutes. After today, you'll never have to see me again." Those words should have meant nothing. Elvis had heard thousands of stories, thousands of requests, thousands of promises. People asked him for money, for signatures, for houses, for cars, for miracles. Most disappeared the moment security arrived. But this woman, she wasn't asking for anything. She looked like someone who had spent decades searching for a single conversation. Elvis slowly opened the driver's door. His manager hurried toward him. "We're already late. The governor is expecting you. The children at the hospital are waiting." Elvis didn't answer. His bodyguard stepped closer. "Let us handle this." Still, no answer. Something inside him refused to drive away. It wasn't sympathy. It wasn't curiosity. It was something far stranger. The moment he looked into her eyes, a forgotten corner of his memory stirred. A feeling, a place, a face. He couldn't explain it. It vanished before he could reach it, yet it left behind a question that refused to disappear. Why did this complete stranger feel familiar? He walked toward her. Every step across the gravel echoed through the silent courtyard. Fans instinctively lowered their phones. No one wanted to interrupt whatever was unfolding. When Elvis finally stood only a few feet away, he noticed something that made his heartbeat slow. The woman's hands were shaking so violently she could barely keep them together. Not because she was cold, because she was terrified. Terrified that she might be too late. Elvis spoke softly. "Tell me." She swallowed hard. "I've waited more than 20 years for this moment. I came here hundreds of times. I watched you leave through these gates. I watched you return. I almost spoke so many times. But I was afraid." She paused. Another tear rolled down her cheek. "And every year that passed, the truth became heavier." Elvis remained silent. Everyone around them remained silent. Even the wind seemed to disappear beneath the old Tennessee sky. Finally, the woman slowly turned around. Without another word, she began walking toward the oldest oak tree on the Graceland property. Its enormous branches stretched across the lawn like giant arms protecting secrets buried beneath decades of memories. She stopped beneath it, then looked back. "If you still have the same heart you had when you were a little boy, please follow me." Those words struck Elvis harder than anyone realized. A little boy? Why would she say that? His manager shook his head. "This is becoming dangerous." Security stepped forward again. "We should end this." But Elvis quietly raised one hand. "No." It was only one word, yet every guard immediately stepped aside. Slowly, he followed her. Each step felt strangely familiar. The closer he came to the tree, the faster his heart began beating, not from fear, from something he couldn't explain. The woman reached the trunk. She gently rested her hand against its rough bark, closed her eyes, and smiled through tears. "I wondered if this tree still remembered." Elvis frowned. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, she slowly knelt onto the damp ground. Then, to everyone's complete confusion, she pushed both trembling hands into the earth. One handful of soil, then another, then another. No one spoke. The only sounds were birds in the distance and the quiet scrape of dirt falling beside the growing hole. Minutes passed. Security exchanged nervous glances. Fans leaned against the fence trying to understand. One little girl quietly asked her father, "What's she looking for?" He couldn't answer, because nobody knew, not even Elvis. Then, her fingers struck something solid. She froze. Her breathing stopped. Carefully, as though touching something sacred, she brushed away the remaining dirt. An old piece of cracked leather slowly emerged from the earth. The woman lifted it with both hands. A tiny child's boot, weathered by time. Its leather had hardened. Its faded laces looked ready to crumble into dust. Yet she held it as though it were made of gold. Tears poured down her face. She kissed it gently, then turned toward Elvis. Her voice barely escaped her lips. "Do you remember this?" Elvis accepted the boot. At first, nothing happened. He studied every inch of it, confused, searching. Then, his thumb brushed across a tiny scar carved into the heel, a crooked little mark shaped almost like lightning. His breathing stopped, his fingers tightened, his knees weakened. The world around him disappeared. The fans, gone. The guards, gone. Graceland, gone. Suddenly, he wasn't standing beneath an old oak tree. He was a barefoot little boy again. The smell of wet Tennessee earth filled his lungs. Rain soaked his clothes. His mother smiled despite having almost nothing. He remembered crying. He remembered making a promise so impossible that only a child could believe it. One day, he would make his mother proud. One day, he would make sure she never cried because of poverty again. And then, he remembered burying something beneath this very tree. His lips trembled. A single whisper escaped him. No. His eyes filled with tears. No. He looked at the woman. How do you have this? The woman closed her eyes, because the answer she had carried for more than 2 decades was finally about to change Elvis Presley's life forever. Elvis could barely keep the tiny leather boot in his trembling hands. The morning air suddenly felt colder. The laughter of the fans beyond the gates had disappeared completely. Even the birds that had filled Graceland with song only moments earlier seemed to have vanished into an unnatural silence. His heartbeat echoed louder than anything around him. How do you know about this? The woman slowly wiped away the tears running down her face, but new ones immediately replaced them. Because I was here. Those 3 words struck Elvis harder than any headline, any criticism, or any standing ovation he had ever received. He stared at her. No. His voice was barely audible. Nobody was here. I buried this alone. The woman gently shook her head. You believed you were alone. But you weren't. She slowly walked toward the old oak tree and rested one fragile hand against its weathered trunk. I was only a young woman then. I had nowhere to go. I had lost my husband only a few months before. I had no family left. I spent many nights sleeping beneath these trees because I couldn't afford anywhere else. The crowd listened without making a sound. Even Elvis's manager had forgotten about the charity event. Time itself seemed to stop beneath the branches of the ancient oak. The woman closed her eyes. I remember that afternoon as if it happened yesterday. It had just rained. The ground was soaked. You couldn't have been more than a little boy. You walked here alone. You were crying. You kept looking over your shoulder to make sure nobody followed you. Elvis's breathing became uneven. Fragments of forgotten memories began flashing through his mind. The smell of rain, mud covering his small shoes, his mother's exhausted smile, the empty kitchen table, the constant fear that there wouldn't be enough money for another week. The woman continued. You sat exactly where you're standing now. You took off one of your little boots. You dug into the wet earth with your bare hands. I watched from behind those bushes. I wanted to leave, but something told me to stay. Her voice cracked. You held that little boot against your chest. And then you whispered something I'll never forget. She looked directly into Elvis's eyes. One day, Mama will never cry again. The words shattered him. His knees weakened. He had no memory of saying them, yet somehow, deep inside, he knew they were true. His mother had spent years hiding tears behind gentle smiles. She always believed Elvis never noticed. But children notice everything. The woman smiled sadly.
You kissed that little boot.
You buried it beneath this tree. And before covering it with dirt, you looked up at the sky. You promised God that if he helped your mother someday, you would spend the rest of your life helping strangers. A tear rolled down Elvis's cheek, then another. He remembered. Not clearly, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to remember the feeling. Enough to remember the promise. He covered his face with one hand. My God. I really said that. The woman nodded. You did. And then you ran home before your mother found out you had wandered away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The old oak swayed gently in the breeze as sunlight filtered through its leaves. Finally, Elvis asked the question that had haunted him since she first called his name. If you saw all of this, why didn't you tell me before? The woman lowered her eyes.
Because this wasn't my secret. It belonged to a little boy. And I promised myself I'd only return it when that little boy had become the man he dreamed of becoming. Elvis couldn't hold back anymore. He broke down completely. The king of rock and roll, the man who had performed before millions, who had faced screaming crowds without fear, now stood beneath an old oak tree, crying like the little boy he once was. The fans beyond the gates quietly wiped away their own tears. Several security guards looked away, pretending to inspect the grounds so no one would notice the emotion in their faces. But the woman wasn't finished, not even close. She reached into the worn pocket of her faded dress. Very slowly, she pulled out an old envelope. Its edges had turned yellow with age. The paper was cracked from being opened and folded thousands of times. Across the front, written in faded blue ink, was a name that made Elvis freeze. Gladys, his mother's name. His hands began shaking harder than before. He stared at the envelope without touching it. Where did you get that? The woman held it carefully against her heart. It belongs to you. It always did. I've protected it for more than 20 years. Elvis looked completely bewildered. My mother never wrote me a letter. The woman swallowed, fighting back another wave of tears. No, she whispered. She never had the chance to give it to you. The air seemed to disappear from Elvis's lungs. What do you mean? The woman slowly lifted her eyes. She gave it to me the day before she died. Every person standing in the Graceland courtyard felt a chill run through their body. Elvis's face turned pale. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. He couldn't even blink. The woman held the envelope toward him. I promised her that I would place this letter into your hands only when I knew your heart was still the same heart that buried this little boot beneath this tree. Elvis reached for the envelope, but just before his trembling fingers touched it, the woman quietly whispered the words that would change everything he believed about his own mother. Elvis, your mother kept one secret from you until the very end, and it's written inside this letter. Elvis stared at the faded envelope as though the entire world had disappeared around him. Everything became strangely distant. The fans, the guards, his manager, even the enormous oak tree beneath which he stood. Nothing existed anymore except the yellowed envelope resting in the trembling hands of the woman who had carried it for more than 2 decades. Across the front, written in familiar blue ink, were only a few simple words. "For my son, Elvis." His vision blurred. He recognized the handwriting immediately. There wasn't the slightest doubt. It belonged to his mother, Gladys Presley. The woman carefully placed the envelope into his hands. "I promised her that I would never open it. And I never did. For more than 20 years, I protected it. I waited. I prayed. I wondered if this day would ever come." Elvis's fingers trembled so violently that he could barely break the brittle seal. The paper had become fragile with age. One careless movement could have destroyed it forever. The courtyard remained completely silent. No camera clicked. No one whispered. Even the wind seemed unwilling to interrupt the moment. Very slowly, Elvis unfolded the letter. The first line stole the air from his lungs. "My precious boy." His eyes instantly filled with tears. You could almost hear her voice, warm, gentle. The same voice that had comforted him through every difficult night of his childhood. He swallowed hard and began reading aloud. "My precious boy. If you're reading this, it means God has finally decided the time was right. There are many things a mother wants to tell her child. Some are easy. Others are too heavy for a young heart. This is one of those things." Elvis stopped reading. His breathing became uneven. The woman quietly nodded. "Keep going." He looked back at the letter. "I know you've spent your life believing that success came from your talent alone. It didn't. Long before the world knew your name, someone was already praying for you." Elvis frowned. His eyes moved faster across the page. "When you were just a little boy, you buried your tiny boot beneath the old oak tree. You believed no one had seen you, but someone had." His hands froze. He slowly lifted his eyes toward the woman. She quietly smiled through tears. Elvis looked back at the letter. "The young woman hiding beneath that tree came to me the next morning. She told me everything. She told me about your promise. She told me she had never witnessed such hope inside a child. From that day forward, she visited our church every week. She prayed for you. She prayed for me. When we had nothing to eat, she quietly left bread outside our door before sunrise. When we couldn't afford medicine, she found a way. She never wanted us to know it was her." A tear fell onto the paper, then another. Elvis could barely continue. "The world may one day call you a king, but before anyone else believed in you, this woman believed in the little boy who cried beneath an oak tree." Elvis slowly lowered the letter. His entire body shook. He turned toward the woman. "You," she nodded. "I never wanted you to know. You already carried enough." Elvis stared at her in complete disbelief. "You helped my family?" The woman smiled softly. "No. I simply returned the hope your little heart gave me that day." Elvis couldn't understand. "What do you mean?" She looked toward the old tree. "The afternoon I saw you bury that boot, I had already decided it would be my last day alive.
The entire courtyard seemed to stop breathing. I had lost my husband. I had lost our baby. I had nowhere to live. I believed God had forgotten me. Her voice trembled. I came here because I wanted one last quiet place before ending everything. Several people covered their mouths. The woman continued.
Then I saw a little boy crying. I thought he would ask God why life was so unfair. But instead, he asked God to bless his mother. He asked for nothing for himself. A broken smile appeared across her face. I remember thinking, if a child who owns almost nothing can still believe tomorrow will be better, maybe I can survive one more day. She closed her eyes. One day became another, then another, and eventually, my life began again. Elvis could no longer stand. He slowly dropped to his knees beneath the oak tree. Tears streamed freely down his face. "You saved me," he whispered. The woman gently shook her head. "No, you saved me first." She knelt beside him. "And years later, you saved me again." Elvis looked up, confused. She smiled. "You don't remember?" "It was raining. I collapsed beside a lonely highway. Cars kept passing. Nobody stopped. But one young musician turned his car around. He carried me into the passenger seat. He drove me to the hospital. The doctors told me I had only minutes left." Elvis's eyes widened. A forgotten memory suddenly returned. A storm. Headlights cutting through heavy rain. A woman lying unconscious beside the road. He had never known her name. He had never expected to see her again. "I thought," he whispered. "I thought anyone would have done the same." She smiled. "No, they didn't. You did. And because of that, I lived long enough to raise my 2 children. They both became doctors." She looked toward the crowd. "They've spent their lives saving thousands of people." She turned back to Elvis. "So every patient they rescue carries a small piece of the kindness you showed a stranger in the rain." Elvis buried his face in his hands. For the first time in many years, he wasn't the king of rock and roll. He wasn't a legend. He wasn't the world's biggest star. He was simply the little boy beneath the oak tree, whose promise had quietly changed lives he would never even know. Without saying another word, he stood and embraced the woman. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Around them, tears flowed freely. Security guards quietly wiped their eyes. Fans held one another as they cried. Even Elvis's longtime manager, a man rarely moved by emotion, removed his glasses to hide the tears rolling down his face. Several minutes passed before Elvis finally stepped toward the old oak tree once more. He gently dug a small place beside the roots. He placed the tiny leather boot back into the earth. Next to it, he carefully laid his mother's letter. Then he covered them both with fresh soil. He turned to one of the workers. "Bring me a simple stone. Nothing expensive, nothing grand. Just a plain piece of stone." By sunset, it stood beneath the old oak tree. Only one sentence was carved into its surface. A single act of kindness can become a lifetime of miracles. Years passed. Visitors continued coming to Graceland from every corner of the world. Most admired the mansion.
Some searched for memories of the world's greatest performer. A few noticed the old oak tree standing quietly at the edge of the lawn. To them, it was only a tree. But to Elvis Presley, it was the place where he discovered the greatest truth of his entire life. Fame creates applause. Money creates comfort. Success creates headlines. But kindness keeps changing lives long after the people who first gave it are gone. And perhaps that is why the greatest performance Elvis Presley ever gave was never on a stage.
It happened beneath an old oak tree, where a forgotten promise from a little boy became a miracle that echoed through generations.